Is everybody ready to start? Okay, well, thank you all for coming out here tonight. A couple of housekeeping items first. We do have a regular meeting that starts at 7, so for the briefing, at least part 1, we can only go until about 6:45, 6:50, just to give us 5 or 10 minutes to reset the room accordingly. If the council wishes to continue the conversation after the meeting, we can certainly take a 5 or 10 minute break, pull the tables back together, and then reconvene to continue the briefing at that point in time. Next thing I wanted to point out to you, we did send out an email today. Jacksonville Fire Rescue is not here for the briefing tonight. I did have a conversation with Sam Musa at the end of last week where we talked about it. He brought up a few good points of why he didn't feel comfortable having his staff here at this point in time. The first is that the city of Jacksonville currently provides fire and EMS services to over 850,000 residents in the metro area. They have a way that they perform their service, and he did not want to place his staff in the position of trying to answer questions of why they do things the way they do things. That's their standard operating procedures for how they run their department, and they felt that that was not something that they should get into the minutia of defending. The second thing is I just wanted to remind everyone that Jacksonville Beach approached the city of Jacksonville to ask them to explore this possibility of the consolidated fire service. This was not Jacksonville pushing us. This was us asking them. And I think it is safe to say that over the past year plus that Karen's been involved with this process, Jacksonville has worked with us in a good faith effort to negotiate and provide us with a proposal that is fair and representative of the type of service that they provide throughout all of Duval County. The last thing I wanted to wrap up with is that when we take a look at the actual proposal, which you all received a copy of the draft agreement, in my conversation with Sam, I guess the right way to say it is the level of service that they're providing and what they're proposing to provide for service to the community is their standard. If we wanted to enhance that standard, we would have to pay extra because it's above and beyond what would be their standard level of service. And if we wanted to do something different, operate different, he wasn't too thrilled with the idea of changing their standard practices for one portion of the greater Duval County. So what we see is, for the most part, I guess what we'd say is kind of the best proposal we're going to get from working with Jacksonville. With that being said, they did say if we wanted to enhance services and add more, they would certainly be willing to work out what that additional cost would be to us if we wanted to add resources to either of the 2 fire stations. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to have Deputy City Manager Karen Nelson walk through a very brief PowerPoint presentation to talk about all the highlights that are in the current proposed agreement. I would ask that you hold your questions till the end, so that way we can get through the presentation as quickly as possible and get into that Q&A session. There's also some additional documents that you should have received either by email today, and if you did not check your email, there should be a packet in front of each of you. That additional information is a summary that shows the staffing exceptions where we went below 8 minimum staffing within our department over the last 12 months. There's another summary that shows overlapping incidents within the community where we had either 2, 3, or 4 concurrent calls for service. There's also an email that was sent out to the council and myself as city manager from our IAFF union with some points in there as well. And then last is Councilman Vogel saying he had some information that he requested be distributed to the group, and you should all have a copy of that as well. So with that being said,
can I just say something real quick about this pros and cons list? I mean, I think it's important, it would be important to have somebody from JFRD here, because on this list, it seems very biased against them. And from what you've said, if they're saying they have policies in place, so if when we go down this list, it's saying that we're going to have reduced coordination, impact to emergency events. Is that just supposition, or is that factual? Because I think without them here to actually explain what the policies are, I would like this not to be even talked about, because this is somebody's opinion. It's not based on any fact.
And I think it's safe to say that the majority of what you see there is the perception of the organization based on a lack of working with Jacksonville Fire Rescue in the past.
Right.
One of the things I tried to summarize within the cover memo is that In the past, having your own fire department meant that the fire chief, the police chief, the rec and parks director, the public works director, all reported to the city manager.
Right.
If something needed to get done and cooperation needed to be had, all the city manager had to do was say, you're doing it, and it would take place. With contracting out a service with another agency, while they may provide a service to us, they don't necessarily work for us in the same capacity as they do the city of Jacksonville administration. So their first priority will always be whatever the mayor or the city administrator for Jacksonville is telling them they need to do as a department first, and then providing us the service here in the city may be secondary to their primary goal. So when we talk about responding to emergency events, special events, they may have their own ways that they want to do things, and they may work with us in partnership. We don't know. We've not had that opportunity to say, how will you staff the sea and air show this year, and how will we work with you to coordinate that?
So, but were they given that opportunity to present
We've
that?
never had that opportunity
So,
to.
right,
So why put that in there
was
as fact? That's the problem I had with this whole thing, and I'll go ahead and disclose, I talked to Mr. Musa today too, and his whole problem was this graph stating about the reduced coordination and putting in there that it's as a fact, when they weren't even talked about, or what their plans were, or how they deal with Atlantic Beach now with emergency management. Yet, we're just putting it in there as a negative. I didn't appreciate that because, one, they weren't talked with, and how do we know this is true? We're just, like you said, we haven't done it like that before, so now it's a negative.
But it's noted right here, each department was asked to identify possible impacts. It's never noted that it's fact. It's that these are the things that might be possible that each department identified. It's never in here stated as fact. It's stated right there. Identify
It's an
possible
opinion.
impacts.
So it's,
But it's stated that that's
but
what
the
it
thing
This is what's put out.
we're
This is
scaring our citizens by
Correct.
putting this stuff out, because they're, we're getting phone calls and emails that, we're gonna be left with our own devices here. Jacksonville has not said that anywhere. The department heads may have concerns, but it's not, I'm not gonna base my decision on what I read here, because it's the most biased document I've ever received.
But
I'm
it's
sorry.
stated right in the document how this was, the
Who's
methodology.
but who's
of getting
reading
it.
that?
That's not my problem. You get the whole thing, you read the whole.
But we had this discussion, I had this discussion in my meetings prior to us disseminating this information. And the idea was to put out the least bias and just information out there for individuals to read before we had open dialogue and open communication. And this does not do that. This steers people in a completely wrong direction without Jacksonville commenting, having any input, and us giving our citizens any input. This is a public document now that everybody's reading, and we're getting emails about it when it's not true. Or we don't know it to be true, and the paper's printing it the last 2 issues. And that was exactly what I expressed as a concern before we even got to this point, was it should be neutral. It should just lay out the points as we know them, as the points of the agreement. And we shouldn't steer people one way or another, and then we can have open dialogue and communication with Q&A and let people make their own decisions. But to have a graph like this, and I think based on the reaction that we're getting, it's problematic, because now we'll have backpedaling. I can say that I called every single person that sent me a concerned email, and every single person that I talked to at the end of the conversation was, I'm glad we had this talk, because now I think it's something we should do. But every one of them started out the conversation was, this is a horrible idea, and every one of them said, I read it in the Beach's Leader, the comments. So then I said, well, let me go through what we know and what we have, and then let's have a general conversation, and then let me get your thoughts. And at the end of every single conversation I had was, I appreciate you calling me. I completely take back what I said before. I wish this information was out there. So
Well, that's it, there's a lot of misinformation.
I'm glad we're having this today, but I didn't appreciate this, and I know Jacksonville didn't appreciate it, and I could understand why, because like you alluded to, we came to them for an agreement. It was something that we're interested in, and we formulated this agreement, and now we're kind of saying, oh yeah, if an emergency happens, you're going to potentially leave us in the dust. And I think before we would throw something out there, we should talk about their emergency system and their policies and what they do with Atlantic Beach, who will basically be tied in with Atlantic Beach, and how they meet regularly and do planning regularly with their police department. Now, whether we've partaked in those discussions in the past because we're on our own, that's on us. But
we're dealing with a fire department that's like 7th or 8th biggest in the nation. They have steps and plans and regulations in for emergencies, for special events. This isn't their first rodeo. It's a smaller deal to them controlling us than what we're asking them to do, because we're talking about eliminating our fire department and trusting them to do a better or the same job. I think they're up to it, and I mean, if anybody needs to test their credentials, I mean, they're across the ditch. There's not a lot of complaints against them. There's not a lot of, liability against the city of Jacksonville for things that the Jacksonville Fire Department would like them to do. So, this goes with what Phil's saying, just by putting this out in a negative, with a negative slant is actually not starting things off the right way. We need to be on a level playing field. And for what you're saying, like, people in the beaches leader don't get all this, they just get bullet points.
No, they got that.
It wasn't printed, Bill's name wasn't printed, it was
Well,
bullet
they
points.
printed it, that was the paper, but they received the whole thing.
No, I'm not talking about the editor, I'm talking about people who read the paper. They just see bullet points, they don't see the background. So that's what we're having to now already. People have open minds, I'm sure, it's stable, but I mean, when citizens are saying, hey, this is a horrible idea without knowing the whole facts because of what we put out as a city to the newspaper, it just makes this job so much more difficult. You know? And I don't want this dragging on. I mean, I talked to your predecessor for 6 years about this, 6 years. And, you know, I get stuff like this, I'm like, did this just happen last week? Did we just start negotiating recently? Because I would have assumed that Mr. Forbes and Karen, maybe you can allude to this, during those negotiations, did you not talk about emergency management? Did you not talk about special events? Was this not all ironed out previously?
We did talk about emergency management, and the proposed agreement does include some provisions for Jacksonville to provide emergency management during that event and to have someone out here during an event at our EOC. That particular graph was really derived from discussing with the department heads what the interdepartmental impact might be, and those are their concerns, that communications across departments will be more difficult than if we are all internally with the same organization and reporting to the same city manager. So that was the purpose of that, was to express some of the potential impacts that are concerns for our other department heads in the city.
I agree that it wasn't a good way to start, but I think through this process, we're gonna be able to talk about the positives that are gonna be impacting the community and stuff, and I think that information will get out there.
Well, that's why I would have liked somebody from JFRD to be here to speak, you know, on knowledge and expertise.
That was their decision. We did invite them.
Yeah.
That was their decision to not attend.
Yeah, but I mean, do you really blame them for when they read stuff like this? That they're coming in here, it's like a murder trial where the accused hasn't shown up. You know, he's going to have to come here and defend his department. Why? What have they done? We're asking them to help us. We're paying them a lot less than what we pay now for half an apartment. So I mean, yeah, we should be definitely trying to make this work. But yeah, I mean, it just, the room to me seems half empty without Jacksonville here.
For what it's worth, I didn't take it the way you did. I didn't take it to be that negative. But I'm looking at it from a different lens, perhaps. So
I'm just going off like
I'm just, you know,
well, I have my
just
mind.
saying my perception.
Right, and
was not yours.
Right, but I'm just saying what other citizens have said to me. I've really got my mind made up as well, because like I said, I've been working on this for 6 years. But when I get emails and phone calls from concerned residents, because there's a little bit of misinformation out there, it makes my job harder. You know, because then I'm having to, I can't speak for Jacksonville, I don't think any of us can, but they have legitimate questions. So
I feel like the beaches leader definitely took a certain position and tried to communicate something to the public that just didn't include all the facts.
because they weren't given them. So I mean, all right.
Okay,
So do you want to proceed and walk through the terms of the agreement?
let's move through the presentation. And again, you know, if we don't have enough time here until 7, we can certainly reconvene after the meeting. I think it should be short enough that we can jump back in.
Okay. This is just a summary of our current operations. We have 2 fire stations, Station 1, which is our main station, and Station 2 at South Beach. We have a total of 30 Jacks Beach Fire Department personnel, 8 personnel per shift, and 1 fire chief, 1 fire marshal, and 1 training lieutenant, all of which who work 40 hours a week. We have 5 apparatus, 3 of those are active and 2 are on reserve. Of the 3 active ones, that includes 1 engine and 1 ladder truck at Station 1 and 1 engine at Station 2. In addition, there's 1 rescue unit at Station 1 with 2 personnel. That unit is provided by Jacksonville Fire Rescue, the personnel in the unit. In 2018, we had 3,353 calls for service. 69% of those were emergency medical service calls. 29% were hazardous conditions, and 2% were fires. Our average response time during 2018 was 4 minutes and 8 seconds. Our current annual budget is $4.2 million. That includes annual operating costs and capital. Under the proposed fire services agreement, at fire stations 1 and 2, the buildings and the land is where the services will be provided, just like they are now. City of Jacksonville Beach would retain ownership of the land and the buildings. Jacksonville Beach would maintain the grounds and the landscaping at the buildings. Jacksonville Fire Rescue would effectively become a tenant of the stations with no rent. They would have exclusive operating rights for those stations for the term of the agreement, which is a 20-year agreement. And Jacksonville would maintain the buildings and pay all the utilities going forward, and that's all the maintenance on the building would be the responsibility of Jacksonville going forward. As far as apparatus and equipment, Jacksonville Fire Rescue would assume ownership of the Jacksonville Beach Fire Department equipment and apparatus. That would include the 3 active engines and equipment, apparatus and equipment that we have now. The 2 reserve engines would likely be sold off before the effective date of the agreement. Jacksonville Fire Rescue would maintain and replace all of the apparatus and equipment going forward. Proposed levels of service under this agreement are 7 per shift on apparatus, and there's a breakdown of that on the following page. We can talk about that. And a battalion chief would act as liaison to the city manager. That battalion chief would not regularly be stationed in Jacksonville Beach. There is discussion in Jacksonville to add funding to provide a chief at the beaches district, but it would include Atlantic Beach Station as well as Jacksonville and the 2 Jacksonville Beach stations. That funding is not approved yet, so that additional position is not included in this agreement. Should the funding be approved, the intent would be to add a chief for all 3 of these beach stations.
Funding approved.
Jacksonville.
And paid for between all 3 cities?
Paid for by Jackson, in Jacksonville's budget.
So it wouldn't come back?
So they would add a chief to be stationed at one of these 3 stations.
And I was told that that was their plan to do that, so is that just going through city council vote, or what's the necessary step?
It hasn't been approved yet, so we couldn't include it in the agreement because it hasn't yet, the funding hasn't been approved for it, and what we have been told is that that's their intent.
It would, if we pass this, then it would come up at approval?
Should this council pass this, of course, it then has to go to Jacksonville.
Right.
And so sometime in that meantime, they're in their budget process. And so should it get approved, their intention is to add a chief, 1 chief out here for the 3 stations. The Jacksonville Fire Rescue apparatus included in this proposed agreement is 1 engine at Station 1 with 3 personnel and 1 ladder truck at Station 2 with 4. The rescue unit at Station 1 with 2 personnel would continue with no change, provided by Jacksonville. This is a graph of the current minimum staffing. At Station 1, we have a 2-man engine, a 2-man ladder, and 1 shift commander who drives an SUV. We also have at Station 1 the Jacksonville Fire Rescue unit with 2 personnel. At Station 2, we have 1 engine with 3 personnel. So total apparatus of 3 active, total minimum staffing for personnel is 10, and that includes the Jacksonville Rescue. Under the proposed agreement, minimum staffing will include 1 3-man engine at Station 1 and the 2-man rescue unit, and then 1 4-man ladder at Station 2. So a total of 2 apparatus and 9 personnel per shift. For the-
Are those numbers correct? Because I put 3 different emails the last 2 weeks saying 10, 9, 8.
That's minimum staffing for Jacksonville Beach, that's minimum staffing that's proposed in this agreement for Jacksonville. So I know we've had a lot of discussion about what that means. 8 is the number, the minimum staffing for us that we don't go below. So we may staff 9, but that allows for 1 leave spot for each shift so that personnel can take leave. Minimum staffing, we don't go below that. If we have 2 people who want to take leave in 1 spot, we would have to use overtime to cover that extra shift, so that you don't go below 8.
Right, there's times it's went below 8.
Pardon me?
There are times where it's went below 8.
Yes, actually, for various unexpected
Okay, we can
situations
say
people have to take off. We did run an analysis on that for over the past 14 months. There was a total of 37 hours where we went below 8. The longest continual stretch was, I believe, 4 hours.
So what % of the time are we at 8 and not?
The majority of the time. That's why we say 8 is our minimum staffing. So we're not trying to present the full staffing number with no leave slots. 8 is our minimum staffing number. That's the number that we don't go below.
So the shortfalls are made up by overtime, correct?
If there are more than 2 leave slots, we allow for 1 leave slot per shift.
Okay.
Okay.
Was that on that 4.3 million, did that include the overtime?
Yes.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. So for the personnel transition, Jacksonville Beach fire captains and lieutenants would become Jacksonville Fire Rescue Suppression Engineers. So lieutenants would lose 1 rank and captains would lose 2. Jacksonville Beach Fire Department firefighter engineers would become Jacksonville Fire Rescue firefighters. They would lose 1 rank. In terms of seniority, Jacksonville Beach officers will receive 1 year of seniority for each year of service as a captain and each year of service as a lieutenant. So they would be able to retain their seniority. Jacksonville Beach firefighter engineers will receive continuous service time under the Jacksonville Fire Collective Bargaining Agreement. Accrued leave, Jacksonville Beach fire personnel may elect to transfer up to 100 hours of accrued leave to JFRD. For those hours that are transferred to JFRD, City of Jacksonville Beach will pay the City of Jacksonville for those hours at each employee's respective rate of pay on the effective date of the agreement. For all the other hours not transferred, City of Jacksonville Beach will pay the employees for the leave not transferred in accordance with the collective bargaining agreement and personnel policies. The agreement defines exactly what that means, but essentially what we have agreed to do is pay them as if they are retiring in good standing under the terms of the collective bargaining agreement. The estimated leave payout would be just under $400,000, and that was as of the last calculation, which was in February, end of February. For pension, Jacksonville Beach personnel may elect to remain in the Jacksonville Beach firefighters retirement system, or they can join the City of Jacksonville defined contribution plan. City of Jacksonville Beach would be required to pay off the unfunded liability as of the effective date of the agreement. Going forward, after that unfunded liability is separated out, then the City of Jacksonville would pay all future costs of the firefighters plan. And that includes the normal costs, the administrative costs, the gains and losses that will all be the responsibility of the City of Jacksonville. City of Jacksonville Beach would continue to administer the firefighter plan, so we would have to keep pension administration in-house. Our pension board would still be here, meetings will be here, and we would administer the plan just as we do now.
So, just a quick question on that. So would we be locking in the rate, the unfunded liability rate? It'd be a 10-year loan?
It's not, we would, it's really a flat amount, dollar amount that we have defined as the unfunded liability. Of course, it's still subject to change until we would define an effective date of the agreement. So whatever that number is, and right now it's estimated to be at $5.1 million. That's our responsibility. Now,
So
we can
even if
amort-
the economy hit the tank in 2 years, our payment wouldn't change?
Right. The idea is we're only responsible for whatever the unfunded liability is on the date of the agreement. Going forward, those employees would be Jacksonville employees, and whatever future cost of the pension plan would be the responsibility of Jacksonville. So we did estimate the unfunded liability. We had the actuaries estimate it, and it came in at $5.1 million. We can amortize that over a period of no longer than 15 years. We are recommending that we amortize it over 10 years. The estimated cost to pay off the unfunded liability would be $737,000 for a period of 10 years. And so at the end of that 10-year period, we would have no future obligation to fund the pension plan.
And in the savings that we have, you might be getting to that, in the savings that we recognize, that
Mhm.
payment's in there?
Yes, yes. For auxiliary services, Jacksonville Fire Rescue will provide blood pressure checks for the community, fire hydrant inspections, tours for schools and organizations, CPR and public safety seminars. Jacksonville Fire Rescue would not provide car seat installation services. They would not provide smoke detector services at the same level as we currently do. They do provide smoke detector services. We can go into a little bit more detail on that if we need to. Jacksonville Fire Rescue would not provide fire marshal services. And emergency management coordination for City of Jacksonville Beach, what we are talking about here is that internal coordination, our EOC command, and coordination with the other departments. So I don't want that to imply that Jacksonville would not provide emergency services for us.
For the, in the past, that's been our fire chief, has been the coordinator for that. Who would be the coordinator for our EOC and the training?
We would have to internally, come up with another solution. We have discussed having that placed with the fire marshal potentially, or with the police department, or a combination of both, the fire marshal and we haven't gotten to it yet, but we are recommending a deputy fire marshal. They could manage the emergency management coordination and the proactive, the training, and in conjunction with the police department. But we would have to find resources to continue to provide that internal coordination.
So the coordination as far as at the command center during an emergency, they're obligated to provide somebody during that circumstance?
Under the agreement, yes, they're obligated to provide personnel at our beaches EOC.
So during a hurricane, I'm sorry you've been there, but you see that Jacksonville EOC has places for Neptune and Atlantic Beach, where the mayors, I believe, are on an executive board where they make decisions. If fires is going to go to Jacksonville, was there any point in us having our own EOC and UNF, or would it not be more prudent to join the Jacksonville EOC, because the county is the one that controls all the apparatus and stuff, correct?
Right, but our EOC is not just for the fire department, so
Right.
I think there is an extreme, huge benefit to us maintaining our own EOC.
So how does Atlantic
Coordinate
Beach do it then? Because they have a separate police department.
They don't have a utilities department.
They don't have utilities, and that's a big
Utilities and
factor for us.
public
It's a big
works
difference.
management during a catastrophe is equally important as far as.
Yeah,
And
right.
police.
I know we're keeping our people's energy and our police,
Yeah,
so.
why would we send them to the EOC if we
No, I'm
want to
talking
keep
about
local control
I'm
people?
talking about how we communicate between our EOC during a crisis and the one set up for the county.
I think to answer your question, Chief Whitnell, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a seat for Jacksonville Beach at the City of Jacksonville EOC.
Correct.
To help function as a liaison during those emergency events.
We actually coordinate with them all the way up to the point where there's evacuation, and the mayors all go over there to Jacksonville. And then when we get to the point where we're getting ready to initiate evacuation, we come back to our own EOC.
We also have police and fire personnel that go down to the Jacksonville EOC now and coordinate and communicate. And then we have radios and we maintain communication with them now.
And
What we're really
works
talking,
good, right?
it's very, yeah, it does, but what we're really talking about here is the internal coordination. Across Beaches Energy, Public Works, Parks and Recreation, the city manager's office, the fire department, the police department, that is coordinated and maintained by the fire chiefs throughout the year,
Okay.
okay?
And the thing with the car seats, I asked for numbers as far as how many Jax Beach residents get car seats put in. I don't know if you got that data.
I don't know if we have that data. Do we have it tracked by residents and non-residents?
At Sunday, excuse me, I compiled that information and sent it forward. Some of the hard parts in that was the employees, people who work here at Jackson, like we did one for people working at Metropolitan. Our hospital has an OB unit there. Well, before they let people take the babies out, they make sure the car seat's been checked and things. So we have a number that I thought we submitted for the car seats in the city, but we can't capture those other numbers.
Right.
So it's,
That's
a lot.
400 for the jobs total.
480 something,
47?
44.
but they couldn't distinguish Jax Beach residents versus other.
But well, I think Chief Whittle told me at our briefing that you take records of each person that you
right.
provide the service to, so we didn't have that total for Jax Beach. I understand what you're saying, Steve, but I just want to know, because I know there's like 500 children born a year in Jax Beach. Our population would be pretty big. So,
I mean, it's like 10, it's like 10 or 15%, I think, isn't it?
well, that's what I wanted to find out is this service that we're providing, is it benefiting Jacksonville Beach residents or the whole county, and what's the numbers? If we're providing the service for the whole county, then it's very nice of us to do, but I think it's good to actually look after our residents and our taxpayers first.
We can get as much information as possible together and we'll read it
Yeah, I
together.
think Steve touched on a big piece though, is that they do deliveries at the hospital. The hospital's a very big taxpayer, and they just make sure that the kids are, like, the seats are, in there properly. I think that's what they're supposed to do.
But they do that at the hospital.
No, they do that.
But no, the hospital does that
does
with,
that.
the hospital brings it to the, tells them to go to the fire department, how I understood it.
No, they do it at the hospital.
Install car seats?
I got told the hospital sends them to the fire
The
department.
hospital doesn't install car seats.
I just had a
Well,
thought
probably
2 years ago, they do.
Fire department?
Okay.
I just don't like it.
Just to kind of put it in perspective, some of those smaller salt services, those are services that with minor resources and distribution within the operation, we can absorb. That's, so I don't want to get hung up on car seats, because ultimately, if the council says we want to keep doing it, we'll put a small line item in the budget, we'll figure out how to get it done.
Sure.
The same thing with the smoke detector level of service. We'll put a small line item in the budget, we'll figure out how to get it done. Fire marshal services, we are proposing that we add a deputy fire marshal to create a fire marshal's office to handle not only the fire marshal services and the fire inspections, but also to do some of that internal coordination that Karen was talking about with regards to making sure our emergency management plans are up to date, that departments are receiving appropriate training, et cetera.
So because this goes back to what I started off saying, is that our residents get concerned about things like car seats and smoke detectors, which they should. How is Jacksonville's policy different than ours?
With
as
regards
far as
to-
smoke detectors?
With regards to smoke detectors, they maintain a list by region within the county, and when they hit a certain threshold, then they go out and install all those smoke detectors. We tend to do it more on an ad hoc basis. If someone says, I need a smoke detector, probably within 24 to 48 hours, we're doing the smoke detector. Jacksonville, you might have to wait several weeks to a month or two before you actually get your smoke detector. So it's just a difference in.
That seems like a bit of a liability for them. Someone's house burns down in 2 months. That's how they do it, for sure.
And that's what we were told as to how they do it in Jacksonville.
Okay.
But again, for us, if we want to continue providing it at the same level of service, when you see the financials, I think we had shown in there, a budget of approximately $10,000 to handle all of these minor issues, just to bring them back up to the current level of service that the community currently has.
Thank you.
Some of the staff recommendations, as we've already discussed, we are recommending that we retain a fire marshal position to provide safety inspection services at no cost to Jacksonville Beach businesses. We are recommending that we transfer emergency management coordination for Jacksonville Beach to the fire marshal's office and add a deputy fire marshal to provide additional support for inspection and emergency management activities. We also recommend that we explore continuing the car seat program and supplementing the smoke detector program utilizing other city resources. The reason we say explore is we can discuss how best to go about that, what level of service we really want to provide and what it would take to get that done. We would add a budget line item to make sure that those ancillary services are covered. And in the cost analysis, the projected cost analysis, we did include some funding for those ancillary programs. The financial impact in year one, we expect would be an annual savings of about $900,000. Now, in year one, there would be a one-time leave payout of that $397,000. So in year two, the annual savings would increase by about $400,000 to 1.3. In year three, the annual savings would be an estimated $1.4 million. Keep in mind, these annual costs are estimates only. They assume no changes in any state legislations, economic conditions, and that sort of thing. For that reason, we didn't want to project out any further than 10 years, but you've all seen the 10-year cost projections. After that, the assumptions just become too unreliable, and we didn't want to project out any further than that. Also, at the end of that 10-year period, keep in mind that unfunded liability retention plan would be paid off. Okay. So, Mike, for the next slide, if you wanted to take a look at the organizational impact.
Sure. And I've already gotten kicked a couple times on this one.
That's why I handed it to you.
Again, just to recap, this is specifically the organizational impact. And a lot of it, I think, is perception-based because we've not worked with Jacksonville in a unified system before of fire dispatch. They would be reporting to a city administrator out of Jacksonville. We would be one of their customers, but we don't know what that means when we have a request and they say, well, that's not the direction we're receiving from Jacksonville.
Did we ask Atlantic Beach about their experience with these items?
I asked Andy Hyatt, and Andy said that they're happy with it. It's been 20 years since they've been in contract with Jacksonville, and they're happy with the level of service that they're receiving. And I asked Joe Garrity the same question, and he said the same thing. I think most of the people within those organizations weren't there when the transition was made, but in terms of the current level of service they're receiving, they're happy with it.
Did we ask them specifically, did you ask them about how to handle special events and emergency operations and things like that?
I did not get into that
general?
level of detail. It was a general, are you happy with the services you're receiving from the city of Jacksonville?
I think also that they don't have as many events, like, definitely not the next year.
No doubt, but just in terms of trying to find some sort of.
I spoke to two appointed officials in Atlantic Beach who said the same thing about the fire service and coordination during emergencies. One of them's with the police department and emergency coordination and all of that. No issues. That's probably my concern.
So, just to run through these for finance, it was fiscal savings; for human resources, reductions in labor issues, workers' comp, liability associated with services and vehicles out on the road. For planning and development, possible impact to plans review, code enforcement inspections, and reduced support for damage assessment during post-storm events. Right now, the firefighters of Jacks Beach actually work with the planning department to do post-damage assessment. We would need to reassign that somewhere else within the organization. Again, possible reduced coordination during special events, emergency events, coordination during emergency and special events, and it was the same for these 4 departments. Again, I think right now they enjoy a very high level of communication with the Jacks Beach Fire Department because they are all peer-to-peer and they're all within the same organization. And there's a question as to how will that function if it's outside of the organization. Again, it could end up being better, but there's a thought that with it being unknown, we don't know what it's going to be. So the community impact summary, we want to talk a little bit about this, and maybe we can put a little drawing together. The ability to provide coverage for concurrent events, the staffing levels and the number of apparatus, auxiliary service and community outreach efforts, and fire department presence during peak times, holidays, and special events. We'll actually work backwards. In discussions with the Jacksonville Fire Chief, they said that they will be, it may not be called out specifically in the agreement, but they've indicated that they will be have a very high presence during special events here within the beach community. They understand what that looks like from what the other special events that they have in the city of Jacksonville, and they understand that if they need to roll additional units out to the beach during 4th of July or the Sea and Air Show or something along those lines, they will take the steps that are necessary. The concurrent calls, I want to talk a little bit about this, the staffing levels and the number of apparatus, because I want to make sure everyone understands that there's 2 primary services that the fire department provides. They provide fire suppression services, and they provide the first response EMS service. And each of those require some different recommendations with regards to the level of service. As you probably saw in the email that was provided by the IAFF, right now the vehicles that we staff don't meet the NFPA recommendations. They recommend 3 on an engine and 4 on a ladder, and that is correct. That is an NFPA recommendation. We as an organization have less than that, so that there can be more units on the road ready to respond to an EMS call. You saw that line a little earlier, that we're just at about 70% EMS calls. So it's kind of a catch-22. There definitely is a benefit, and Phil, I think you sent out the information that talked about number of personnel per apparatus, and the higher that number is, the better prepared you are to fight a fire. So the question becomes, based on the limited resources of Jacks Beach, a decision was made well before I got here that it was better to have fewer people per vehicle, but more vehicles on the road than having 2 vehicles that are appropriately staffed for NFPA recommendations.
Are our trucks advanced life support, all of them, or are they basic?
ALS.
Oh, yeah.
So there was a question with regards to the concurrent calls for service, and there was some information that was passed out with regards to 2, 3, and 4 calls all at the same time. I want to talk a little bit about how Jacksonville operates their system with regards to their target area zones and run cards, which is not something that Jacksonville is familiar with because we're not large enough to actually have to worry about that. But I think it's important, and I drew a little diagram here so that you can understand how their system works differently than ours. Right now with, it's not but right now with Jacksonville having 2 stations, it's pretty straightforward. If something happens near Station 1, you deploy the resource from Station 1. If something happens near Station 2, you deploy the resource from Station 2. Since there's 2 apparatus at Station 1, if a primary from 1 and a primary from 2 are both out, the 3rd unit goes into action and goes wherever in Jacks Beach it needs to go. If we get to that point where a 4th call comes in, we're waving the flag and we're saying we need help from outside the area. That's typical protocol. Jacksonville employs the target area zones, the TAZs, and a run card system, which creates a priority pecking order from where the resources come to provide backup within your zone. So to give you an example, this is our Station 1 and 2 in Jacks Beach, and you can see Station 2 would basically be the south half of the city, Station 1 would be the north half. Station 55 in Atlantic Beach covers Atlantic and Neptune. If you go over Beaches Boulevard, you have Station 58, which covers that area, and Station 59 off of San Pablo covers that area. In talking with the chief for Jacksonville, these two stations, which would then be given Jacksonville numbers and put into the queue, would have the same type of priority and condition that 55 does in Atlantic Beach, which means you don't want to move these resources off of the beach unless you have to. And you only have to do that if all the other resources around the neighboring stations are taken up. So the best way to kind of do this as an example, and I did a sample run card, and this would be for Station 58 off of Beaches, is that the first on the run card is Station 58 goes to anything within their area. When they are out of resources, and I don't know if they have 1 or 2 units, but when they are out of resources, they may go to their second pecking order, which calls from 59 in Pablo. And then they go to the third, if Pablo can't respond, they go down to the next one, which would be Station 50 to the west. And then Station 4 might be going to Station 58 north of 58 to the station up here. But ultimately, the 3 beach stations would be the lowest priorities where you would pull those resources to go. Because as I learned from Pinellas County, when you have a resource on the beach, if you pull it off the beach, there's no guarantee you can ever get that resource back onto the beach. So you don't want to touch it unless it's really, really bad. With that being said, because they have so many fire stations that are west of our jurisdiction, the same also works in the reverse. They have the ability to do what's called put on the shift. When you know that the resources are in the process of being depleted or have been depleted, they can actually start moving units, kind of like a domino effect, and ultimately place an additional unit out here to cover what would ultimately be a 3rd call or a 4th call, etc. So I wanted to make sure that everyone understood that, because I know that there was a thought or a fear that by moving the ladder down to Station 2, as opposed to keeping it at 1, that the ladder would constantly be going over the ditch to specifically serve Mayo Clinic and some of the high-rise buildings that are over there. We got what I think was a very good explanation from the fire chief for Jacksonville, that the reason for the ladder to move to Station 2 is that by having a minimum of 4 firefighters at Station 2, it resounds better for their ISO compliance. Whereas at Station 1, keeping the engine with 3, plus the 2 from the rescue, that puts them at 5. Now both stations become ISO compliant. So I just wanted to kind of walk you all through that, because the target zones and the run cards are not something that Jacksonville Beach has had to deal with in the past, because it is a relatively small 2-station department. The other thing I wanted to touch on real quick, and then I know we've got to take a break for the meeting, is with regards to the NFPA standards and their recommendations for fighting a fire. I think it's safe to say that just about any fire station that is in our general area doesn't have 16 firefighters on shift at any given point in time. There's pretty much always a reliance on neighboring stations to provide you support to fight a fire. And the same rang true for Atlantic Beach, and the same would ring true for the Pablo station. If a fire occurred and they wanted to meet NFPA standards of having 16 or more firefighters on site based on the size of the fire, you are reliant upon neighboring departments. Mutual aid versus automatic aid. Right now, we're in a mutual aid situation. We have an agreement with Jacksonville and with St. Johns County. If we need assistance, we need to place a call for them to provide us that assistance in a reserve capacity. Automatic aid is when it's all through a coordinated system and it happens simultaneously without anybody having to ask. That would be a benefit of Jacksonville with regards to being part of their system. It would be an automatic aid situation. As soon as the second unit from either Station 1 or 2 is being deployed, they can take a look at their map and say, take a reserve unit from Station A and move it to B, and take a unit from B and move it to Jack's Beach Station 2. And that's the way it works in automatic versus mutual aid. I think Chief will tell you that right now, whenever we run into one of those situations, we have to place the call to either St. Johns County or over to Jacksonville to provide us that additional
Well,
support.
no, currently we have an automatic aid agreement with Station 55.
With Station
Atlantic
55?
Beach, and with Station 10 in St. Johns County.
Okay, so we have automatic with Atlantic Beach and St. Johns.
Correct.
And anything above and beyond that
additional
is
would be
mutual.
mutual aid.
Anything else would be
Right.
mutual. Okay. So it would be completely automatic aid at that point as opposed to mutual aid.
So you're saying the ISO rating would go up from a 2 to 1 if we're under
I believe,
AFRD?
I believe that's for The shift that they talked about with the units and having the ladder go to 2 was so that Jacksonville could maintain their ISO 1 rating. I believe they're a 1 rating. So that was so it didn't affect their ISO rating.
And we're at 2 now?
We are at 2, yes.
I wouldn't consider it automatic that it's gonna go to a 1, but it probably would.
Okay. Do you know if they have ladder trucks in 58 or 59?
No ladder truck in 58 or 59.
And I got from Jacksonville here, where's your nearest ladder
I
truck?
believe there's one at 50,
50?
which is Beach and Kernan.
Right, so, yeah. So it's just not gonna happen, we're gonna pull resources from the beach.
It would be, as it was explained to us in my experience in dealing with beach fire stations, it would have to be an extraordinary event to pull those resources off the beach. Especially when you're talking about during peak season where traffic becomes an issue.
Right.
You pull a resource off, there's no guarantee you can get the resource back on. That
Well,
becomes
that's
a big issue.
reassuring.
That's a big issue.
Yeah.
With that being said, I know we need to break and reset for the meeting. Does the council want to reconvene the briefing at the end of the meeting?
In response to you.
Just one.
No, that's it.
it.
That's the end of the slideshow, but
That's
we
it
would
for the
like to.
slideshow. There are quite a few issues that we haven't.
Yeah, there's still a
Touched on
Q&A
that.
that we'd like to do, is try and answer as many questions as we can. So even if we're not necessarily resetting the tables, but if we can still at least continue the conversation.
What's gonna be the goal? The end goal, are you still going with the same goal that you have in your?
Yes.
All that, so at the end of the conversation tonight, we will know.
It's how we proceed, it's how we proceed from here.
We're looking for some direction as to how to proceed.
Yes.
Yes. Not a vote.
We're
We're
not
not
doing a
expecting
vote,
that.
we're not looking for public input tonight, it's to find out what the next steps are in the process. I can say that regardless of the ultimate outcome, I do think as the city manager that it would behoove everyone that this go to a vote one way or the other. Whether it's approved, and if it's not approved, I'd still like to have something on the record so that 3 to 5 years from now, if for some reason it doesn't pass, it's not an issue of, well, they talked about it, why didn't it move forward? There will at least have been an action taken, but I do think that I think a vote needs to occur one way or the other.
Absolutely. I mean, if it's a no vote as well, I mean, we're gonna have to come back to the table and revamp our whole fire department because it's inadequate at the minute, number-wise. I saw that from the manpower breakdown, so we either need to hire another 5 or 6 firefighters for Jack's Beach or consolidate. So that would be the direction.
And we don't need consolidate, we
Or
need
merge.
merge. Cause there's a.
Remain contract out.
Right, okay,
The services.
Yes.
yeah, cause it's definitely not
Contract services.
consolidating.
No,
Okay, merge. Sorry.
It's technically, it won't be a consolidation, however, we will
It'll be
not be
contract.
joining with the department, we will be
Contracting
contracting
for the
to
service.
them.
So when we get done talking, we're gonna be looking at either possibilities being potentially a workshop, open to the public, get some feedback from the community. Excuse me. Or going to council and opening the floor to comment there.
Correct.
Moving.
Correct.
So what do you guys wanna do as far as today? Reassemble after council?
Well, do we still have another workshop in 2 weeks?
We don't have to get.
Not,
You need a briefing?
we've got some time reserved for this if necessary.
Right.
The question is, what do you all feel is the appropriate step going forward? I mean, I could make recommendations to you, and you could say yes or no. You know, the soonest that something could be done would be the 15th, but the reality is you might say, you know, we do want some public input, and what's the right way to obtain that public input? Do you want to do a special meeting where the only item on the meeting is the fire service agreement, and we start it at 6 o'clock, and let anybody come who wants to come and speak for 3
I
minutes?
think that'd be a great idea. We have to get citizen input on the 15th. Does anybody oppose it?
I thought the 15th meeting was set up for the downtown CRA. We're gonna meet once in April, and then we're going to get back together with the CRA in May. So I felt like we had one meeting for three things, like things like this, and then one set aside for the month for the CRA, and then we do the joint one the following month, and if needed, we continue with that until we get all that stuff straightened
Is that
out.
on the
I
fifteenth?
don't think we
I don't think that's on
I don't think we,
Within a good day.
it was in May that we're getting back together with the CRA. So we're running out of Mondays in April.
We got,
It sounds like we should probably reconvene this discussion after the meeting and hammer out all these details, rather than try and shoehorn it in 4 minutes.
Yeah,
You're saying April, let's have a special council meeting in April to vote on this and get public comment?
If that's the desire of the council, if that's the direction we want to
I
go.
mean, I think it's fair to have a public workshop and then vote on it. Well, I mean,
And I would do, it should be this month.
right, of course,
Sooner than
it's been dragging on for some people, 18 years, for me, 6. I mean, there's not really, and I know there's obviously people with questions, but I mean, that's the purpose of having a workshop. And it would be good if at the workshop we could get somebody from Jacksonville. That's what I think.
I could say vote workshop, but I wouldn't vote on it at that workshop. I'd give people time to learn about what happened at the workshop, because not everybody's gonna be able to attend. And this way we can get feedback, and then we come back and vote.
We could do
One
another
after.
workshop, we could do a special workshop out, between now and the next council meeting, if that's the desire. And then if you all
Do
were
it next week.
place it on the agenda, we could place it on the agenda for the 15th and get something shaped out.
Yeah, I mean, I really, because you're right, we do have a lot of things coming up with CRA and whatever else is gonna come up, so I think it's good to kind of expedite this. If everybody's up to having a workshop next week, I would be, and then trying to, vote on it on the 15th.
There's a workshop for next.
We have enough
Yeah.
time.
2020.
No, I mean, there's the legal what you need, and then there's the realistic what
Yeah.
people can show up to.
you guys have your calendars? How's Wednesday,
Good with me. No, you're organized.
we could do tentatively, we could do Wednesday the 10th, have the public, just let it be a public comment section, you know, let them come up and make their comments, ask their questions. And then, 15th, we'll roll into a council meeting where we can vote, that gives everybody, 5 days, kind of cop
Yeah,
date.
I teach that night.
The 10th?
Yeah, I teach. 6 to 9.
About the 11th, Thursday the 11th.
I'm not teaching.
How about that?
I
There
don't
you
teach
go.
on Thursdays.
Yeah, that's cool.
Thursday the 11th?
Yep.
Going
I
once?
have an appointment,
I got a 6 to 7.
I have a 6:30 appointment, but
Can you
I
guys,
can change
can you
it.
arrange each other?
Try
What
to
about
change
Tuesday,
it.
or is it,
I teach.
Tuesday the 9th?
Tuesdays always have.
I've got a gym game that night too. I might cancel.
Did you say Jen?
Yeah, Jim Rummy, I'm joking. So, but as far as what you want for direction, I think, is that fine? I mean, I'm just speaking for me, I don't know what anybody else thinks, but I'm assuming that we'll have this workshop and then it'll go to a vote. Is that what you needed?
That's what we're talking about, is then
Right.
getting public comment, workshop.
And they get that information out to residents so they can provide us feedback.
Right,
And then we'll have the feedback from residents on top of those who are able to make it, so we can have a vibrant discussion.
Thursday the 11th, does that work for everybody?
Not for,
I can't do,
Corey, did you say the
I can't do from 6 to 7.
6 to
I can
7.
do 7:30.
You wanna do it in the early afternoon? You wanna do it like 3? Well, that's true,
You
it's
need to
public
make it
meeting.
accessible to the public, yeah.
Well, somebody's
what
gonna.
about next Monday?
I was just gonna say, next Monday night?
Oh, I have an award, so.
I don't know.
Oh,
It's good for me.
Yeah, I could do that.
Apparently.
When is that?
We've got
I
planning
could do the
commission
8th.
But I can do that 6.
Planning Commission?
next Monday.
On
I don't
the
know if they
what
have
time?
anything. It's 7.
At 7.
Well, so we can, make it work. Let's do 5:30.
Next Monday, 5:30 to 7?
Okay. Does that work for you guys?
That's the 8th.
Yeah.
5:30?
5:30 to 7 p.m.
Okay, and then do we still need to meet afterwards, or?
Yeah. Now that we can find the next
Okay, we did
step, I
that
think
before
we're
months.
okay.
Okay, it's 7 o'clock, so we're gonna reconvene in 5 minutes, give everybody a chance to straighten up and do what you need to do.
Thank you. And I would say that if any of the council members have questions, please email Karen or myself, give us a call. You know, we tried to answer all your questions as best we can, but, you know, the more questions we can answer, the more information we can give you, the better an ultimate decision will be.
So we may want to be meeting after this. Because I can see that Sandy's tabbed and I'm tabbed.
You talking
We
about?
have questions.
These questions.
You can meet with the staff, you mean? You can meet
Well,
with
You
them?
can get all your questions
if you want
answered
to, if you
with
want to
staff.
meet with me or with us, and we can answer your questions, and we send that information back out to all of you.
Yeah, I like that.
Every time we
Email-
answer
can you
one of
email
your
the
questions,
questions?
we're
Yeah,
going to
that's
make sure
good
you're all
system.
getting the same
It's
information.
been good.
Yeah, it works for me.
Appreciate it.
Good?
Okay, let's make it 10 now.
And when we get our things back, can I have my things back? Like you just said, take me all out of it. When we get